We've recapped the end of the Phoenix Saga, now it's time to review it. Be sure to stay tuned for this video as we go over one of the most essential X-Men stories there is. And before we get into that, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more comic book reviews. So this is a particularly interesting storyline. After covering the Dark Phoenix Saga, it felt right to go back to the story which inspired it to begin with. The original Phoenix Saga that first introduced the Phoenix Force and about a half a dozen other critical bits of X-Men lore. And we might as well start there, since you can click on the button up here if you're unfamiliar with the Phoenix Saga in the first place, and otherwise I'm just going to assume everyone is all caught up on this thing. This extended storyline is kind of one for the history books when it comes to the X-Men. So many things are either introduced entirely or introduced to the X-Men themselves for the first time here. That includes, but is hardly limited to, the first beginnings of the Fastball Special, Storm's claustrophobia and her general history, Multiple Man, Black Tom Cassidy, the Shi'ar Empire, Lilandra, the Starjammers, the Imperial Guard, the Phoenix Force, and even the Macran Crystal. But on top of all of that, we also get a payoff to a recurring X-Men villain called Eric the Red, which works well on the whole, and a lot of time spent showing off how the then new team of X-Men related with each other and functioned as a unit. It's an awful lot for one story, but it's a pretty long story, and Chris Claremont the writer does a good job at handling it methodically, even if it is somewhat erratic. There's definitely a sense of things not being fully planned out. Each issue seems to be coming up with things as it goes along. But given that, they do a pretty good job at making it all blend together. So yes, in spite of the story having a few ridiculous moments, most particularly around that business surrounding the leprechauns, and an entire issue devoted to a weird fever dream of Professor X's, none of that matters. Not even some of the weird comments about the leprechauns knowing Wolverine and him not being a real mutant. An idea that is never brought up again since they are leprechauns, and no writer, not even Chris Claremont himself, ever wanted to touch the idea again. None of that really bothers me all that much anyways. The leprechauns are a small part in an otherwise really great moment in this story arc. The big battle against the Juggernaut and Black Tom Cassidy gives each character a fun moment to shine here, and has some interesting logistics to it that make it an entertaining battle to watch. So who really cares about a couple of leprechauns when there's so many bigger things going on in the Phoenix Saga? It's worth remembering we're looking at some of Chris Claremont's earliest works with the X-Men. That's why so many influential and important things are being introduced all at once here in this story. Because we're at a point in X-Men history where the most important writer in the line of this comic book team was just getting started with his writing. So if you want to fully understand and appreciate X-Men comics that would come up after this and establish so many things in his time with the X-Men, well, that all kind of begins here. To that end, whatever limits there may be on the Phoenix Saga, and I feel those limits are very small compared to the value and ambition of this arc, it doesn't matter. None of these problems really hold the comic back. This is an essential X-Men comic book story with so many important details to it. This is a really critical and fun comic worth reading. And what really kind of caps off this series and sells me on it is a set of awesome, consistent art from start to finish. Dave Cockrum closes out his time working with the X-Men, and the Phoenix Saga is dedicated to him, which is a very nice and pretty rare gesture for an artist who had only been working on the series for about 14 or so issues. But it's worth remembering that those issues that he worked on include Giant Size X-Men #1, and he's basically responsible for designing so many of these characters. It's an appropriate dedication. Someone at Marvel had the correct presence of mind to recognize how important David Cockrum's contribution to X-Men history was. So it's cool that they took the time to dedicate an entire story arc to him, and as it turns out, one of the most important storylines in X-Men history. That's well deserved. Plus, in the final issue of the comic, John Byrne joins the X-Men title as both penciler and co-plotter, beginning what is still commonly regarded as the best creative team-up to ever work on X-Men in the history of this team, and particularly this series called X-Men and later Uncanny X-Men, basically the big flagship X-Men title. This is a lot of big words for a big story arc that's very ambitious, but it is a big and ambitious story. Byrne only worked on 1 or 2 issues of the Phoenix Saga, but he really did up the game with this last issue in the story. depicting Jean Grey's consciousness being spread out around the cosmos in a very effective way I don't think had been done at this point yet in X-Men comics. I really like this story overall, and I wouldn't change a thing for the world. The Leprechauns were a fun surprise, as insane as it might be, but it is Marvel history we're talking about here, and it's hardly the goofiest element of it out there. So I wouldn't really suggest altering or improving on the Phoenix Saga in any meaningful way, because it holds up, and all the goofiness is just part of its own history, part of its growth into the series it would come to be. It's a cool, classic X-Men story, absolutely worth checking out, even just to see how far these characters have come since their introduction. Wolverine really hasn't rounded out as a character yet, and in this story he's just a walking, talking source of conflict with everyone around him. But you can see that potential for growth there, and I really just like how different that dude would become because of his time with the X-Men. That's almost self-evident within the Phoenix Saga, and it's really fun to see. The other characters, Nightcrawler, Storm, and Colossus in particular, even though they've only been around for a couple of years at this point, are very well realized by this time, and it's cool seeing how all these now well-established traits are solidly being used here already. Overall, if you can't tell, I absolutely recommend you check out this comic for yourself. It's a lot of fun, and works well in introducing a number of key elements to X-Men canon. Thanks for watching this review, and be on the lookout for my next major X-Men project, another essential reading, this time in the form of Days of Future Past.